Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. At least 20 other inventors built electric lamps before him, and one Englishman demonstrated a working incandescent bulb months before Edison's famous breakthrough. So why does almost everyone on Earth give Edison the credit? The answer isn't that he was first. It isn't even that he was the smartest man in the race. It's something a lot stranger than that. It's 9 o'clock at night, sometime in the 1870s. And for most of humanity, the day is simply over. If you're wealthy, your home glows with gaslight, hot, smoky, air-fouling light that eats the oxygen in a room, stains the ceiling, and tarnishes the silver. Gas was genuinely useful. It changed cities, but it came with a price. The lamps hissed, the air grew heavy, the walls blackened over time, and houseplants wilted in the corner. Theatres lit by gas could become brutally hot, and when the lines leaked, fire was never far away. If you were poor, the choices were rougher still: candles, cheap oil, or kerosene. And only a generation earlier, whale oil had helped light the modern world, entire fleets hunting whales to the edge of extinction, all because humanity wanted to push the darkness back a little longer. Then came the first electric lights, but they weren't gentle. Through the 1870s, arc lamps began appearing in streets and train stations and factories, harsh white flames suspended between two carbon rods. They were electric, yes, but they were blinding. Too bright for the home, too violent for the dinner table. The kind of light that belonged on a tower or above a city street, not over your kitchen table. So humanity had fire, humanity had gas, humanity had even begun to tame electricity. But what nobody had was light you could actually live with. Here's the strange part. By the 1870s, everyone already knew electric light was possible. As far back as the early 1800s, Humphrey Davy had shown that electricity could produce light, and later demonstrated the carbon arc, a brilliant electric glare that proved the principle, even if it was nowhere near something you'd want hanging over your kitchen table. After him came decades of attempts, inventors across Europe and America experimenting with platinum, carbon, glass bulbs, vacuum pumps, batteries, and filaments of every imaginable kind. The idea itself was almost insultingly simple: push electricity through a thin material. The resistance makes it heat up, and if it gets hot enough, it glows. That's incandescence. That's the whole principle. The trouble was that everything that glowed also died. Platinum glowed beautifully, but it cost a fortune, and melted if you pushed it. Carbon was cheap, but in ordinary air it burned away in moments. Glass blackened, filaments cracked, bulbs leaked. And even when a lamp held together for a few minutes is not the same thing as lighting a city. So the problem had a shape, and every serious inventor could see it. You needed three things, all at once. First, a filament that could run hot for a long time without destroying itself. Second, a vacuum good enough that there was no oxygen left to burn that filament away. And third, the part everyone forgets, a system to deliver electricity to thousands of homes at once. Because a light bulb without a power grid isn't a revolution. It's just a glowing glass ornament. For decades, brilliant people solved one or two pieces of that puzzle. Nobody had made all of it practical at once. Enter our two main characters, separated by an ocean, chasing the same impossible prize. In England, Joseph Swan, a quiet, methodical chemist from Newcastle. Swan had been experimenting with incandescent light as far back as the 1850s, decades before Edison's famous lamp. He understood the promise of carbon, he understood the need for a vacuum, but the technology around him simply wasn't ready. The vacuum pumps of the day couldn't pull enough air from the bulb, so his early lamps kept burning out. So Swan stepped away, and for years he turned his attention to photography. The idea sat waiting for the machinery of the world to catch up to him across the Atlantic in America. Thomas Edison, 31 years old, already famous for the phonograph, already nicknamed the Wizard of Menlo Park. Edison was not a quiet chemist. He was a showman, a businessman, a relentless experimenter, a man who understood not just invention, but attention, and crucially, he had something almost no other inventor had: an invention factory. Menlo Park wasn't one man alone at a bench. It was a machine for inventing: machinists, glassblowers, chemists, electricians and assistants, working in shifts around the clock, turning ideas into prototypes faster than any lone genius could dream of. In 1878, Edison toured an arc lighting system and made up his mind. The future wasn't blinding public light. It was soft indoor light. Light for homes, light for offices, light that could replace gas. And then he did something dangerous. He announced to the press that he had basically solved indoor electric lighting, and that practical electric light would be ready soon. He hadn't solved it, not even close. But the announcement alone was enough to shake the world. Gas company shares fell, newspapers went wild, investors leaned in. Edison had made a promise, and before he had the invention, now he had to deliver. What followed at Menlo Park was one of the great obsessive grinds in the history of technology. Edison's first instinct was platinum, and it made sense. Platinum could take the heat, and other inventors had tried it too. And like them, he hit the same wall. It was expensive, it was fragile, it was almost impossible to control. Months passed, the confident promises began to look foolish. Investors got nervous, and the same newspapers that had crowned him the wizard started sharpening their knives. So Edison's team turned back to carbon, the material most people had already written off. But they attacked it from a different direction. The key wasn't the filament, it was the vacuum. A new generation of pump, including the Sprengel pump, could strip far more air from a bulb than anything earlier inventors had worked with. And inside a vacuum that good, maybe fragile carbon could finally survive. Then came the hunt for the filament. And this is the part that sounds like myth, though the scale of it is real. The Menlo Park team tested thousands of materials: carbonized paper, cardboard, cotton, thread, plant fibers, anything that might char into a thin, durable strip of carbon. Some of the stranger tests have drifted into lab legend: spider silk, fishing line, even hairs from the workers' beards. Details that feel too perfect to be true, but capture the desperation of the search. Edison's famous line from this stretch has been told a dozen ways, but the meaning never changes. He hadn't failed. He'd simply found thousands of things that didn't work. And meanwhile, the part the Edison myth tends to swallow whole, Joseph Swan was moving again. By the late 1870s, vacuum technology had finally caught up to the idea that had beaten him decades earlier. On the 3rd of February, 1879 in Newcastle, Swan stood before an audience of around 700 people, switched off the room's gas lamps, and lit the hall with his own incandescent bulbs. That was months before Edison's famous October test. Swan was no footnote who turned up after the fact. He was there first. He had working lamps, and his own home in Gateshead would soon become one of the earliest houses on Earth lit by electric light. But Swan had a weakness, and it was a quiet, technical one. His lamps worked, but they used a low-resistance design that was hard to scale into a large network, harder to wire into the kind of central power system the future would actually need. Swan had helped prove the lamp. Edison wanted to build the world around it, and that difference would decide who history remembered. October 1879, Menlo Park. Edison's team seals a loop of carbonized cotton sewing thread inside a glass bulb, pumps the air out, and switches on the current. It glows, soft, warm, steady. An hour passes, and it's still burning. The team starts a vigil. Nobody wants to leave. 10 hours, 12, 13. The lamp burns for over 13 hours and before it finally gives out. By today's standards, half a day sounds almost laughable. But in 1879, it wasn't a product, it was proof. Proof that Edison's approach could work. And within months, his team found something far better: carbonized bamboo, which could burn for hundreds of hours, and eventually far longer. Edison sent scouts hunting plant fibers across the world for the perfect thread of carbon, including to Japan, where certain bamboo proved especially good for the early lamps. And this is usually where the story ends. A genius tries harder than everyone else. A bulb lights up, the world changes. But that version leaves out the most important part, because Edison's real breakthrough was never just the bulb. It was the system. Other people had lamps. Edison built everything around the lamp. The dynamos that generated the power, the wires that carried it, the fuses that made it safer, the meters that let you sell it, the sockets, the switches, the entire network, and the business model to run it. In September 1882, the Pearl Street station in Lower Manhattan came online, and a small district of New York lit up. Hundreds of lamps, drawing power not from isolated batteries or one-night demonstrations, but from a working electric utility. That was the difference. Swan had proved that incandescent light could work. Edison proved it could become an industry. And then came the twist. In Britain, Edison couldn't simply steamroll Swan. Swan's work came first. His patents held up. His claim was strong. So rather than fight a war he might lose, Edison did the thing he often did best. He made a deal. The two rivals merged into the Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company, Eddy Swan, and sold light bulbs side by side. One name became world famous. The other slowly faded into the footnotes. So what actually changed? Everything, but not simply because rooms got brighter. The light bulb changed humanity's relationship with time. For most of history, night had been a wall. After sunset, work slowed, travel turned dangerous, reading became a luxury, and social life bent itself around candles and moonlight and fire. Electric light punched holes straight through that wall. Factories could run longer shifts, for better and very much for worse. Cities grew easier to move through after dark. Shops stayed open later. Nightlife, advertising, street culture, the night shift. All of it expanded under artificial light, and the average human day simply stretched. Some sleep researchers argue that modern lighting helped break apart older patterns of rest, training us to treat midnight not as deep night, but as spare time. The bulb didn't just brighten the room, it made night negotiable, and it dragged an entire civilization in behind it. Because once a home had electricity for its lamps, it could have electricity for anything. The fan, the fridge, the radio, the television, the computer, the phone in your hand. Every one of them entered the house through a doorway that electric lighting held open. There's one final irony. The carbon filament bulb that Edison and Swan fought over, it's gone. Carbon gave way to tungsten, tungsten to fluorescent, fluorescent to LED. And across much of the world, the old incandescent bulb has been phased out or restricted, because it wastes so much of its energy as heat, with only a small fraction of what it draws ever becoming visible light. The invention that defined the modern world turned out, by modern standards, to be a deeply inefficient one. But look at any symbol for an idea, any brainstorm icon, any cartoon flash of inspiration. It's still a light bulb. The object became obsolete. The meaning never did. The world didn't need one genius to imagine electric light. Dozens imagined it. Some built it, some demonstrated it, some patented it, and some were forgotten. What the world needed was someone obsessed enough to turn a glowing experiment into a complete system. A lamp, a grid, a business, a future. Necessity is the mother of invention, but obsession is the midwife.